Welcome to Mindvine, a mental health podcast for everyone. Since our first episode in 2016, we have been sharing stories of recovery, engaging with experts, and tackling the stigma associated with mental illness. The Mindvine podcast is produced by Ontario Shores Centre for Mental Health Sciences and is available on YouTube, Spotify, and Apple Podcasts.
Welcome to the Mindvine podcast. My name is Julie VanHartingsveldt, and I am the External Relations Specialist here at Ontario Shores, and it is my great pleasure to be guest hosting our International Women's Day podcast today. I am so incredibly thrilled to be welcoming three inspiring leaders from Ontario Shores to our podcast today. Please join me in welcoming Melissa, Jeanie, and Roxanne. I'm going to have them introduce themselves because their roles are incredibly interesting, and I certainly wouldn't give them the justice that their positions deserve. So first up, we will have Melissa introduce herself. Welcome, Melissa.
I want to start off by saying thank you, Julie, for hosting us here today, and to Roxanne and Jeanie for our ability to have this conversation today. My name is Melissa Baldassarre, and I'm the clinical manager of the Forensic Transitional Unit at Ontario Shores. I've been employed here for longer than a decade now in various leadership capacities, and my current role involves supporting largely a population who are governed under the Ontario Review Board, and we support their transition to the community while supporting their recovery and mental health and well-being. A little bit about myself. I am an independent mother of three young girls who are lovely. Sienna, Maya, and Aria keep me very busy. And in my free time, I am pursuing my Master's of Health Administration and Community Care at Ryerson, and I'm a part-time realtor as well. So thank you for having me here today.
Thank you so much for joining us today. I can't wait to hear more. Jeanie, welcome.
Thank you. And yes, I would echo Melissa. Thank you for this opportunity. So my name is Jeanie Zabukovec. I am the manager of research and academics. So in my portfolio, I oversee the team that supports research activities across the organization, which include, the development of applications for REB proposals. We support data collection and analysis, program evaluation, knowledge mobilization activities, which include publications and whatnot to share the impact of the research findings that we have. In addition, on the academic side, we support medical and non-medical student placements. And lastly, I oversee the library services offered to Ontario Shores. A little bit about myself. I am a mother of a almost 4-year-old daughter and a 2-year-old son.
Excellent. Welcome. Thank you so much. Roxanne.
Oh, thank you again. I share their same thoughts. Thank you for having me today on Women's National Month, I guess it is. So my name is Roxanne Cain. I'm the manager for the Centralized Scheduling and Staffing Department, as well as the Nursing Relief Pool. I've been at Ontario Shores for about 15 years. So in my role, I'm responsible for staffing the inpatient units, which there's about 16 inpatient units. Also responsible for the Nursing Relief Pool, and it's a mix of RNs and RPNs who help to staff the hospital in times of absences, sick calls, various different things that may come up. The role is very exciting. Of course, we have a global staffing shortage across Ontario, but I do enjoy the role. I enjoy it because of the people, the staff, and my colleagues that I work with. A little bit about myself. I have 2 kids. I have a 15-year-old son named Alex. I have a 7-year-old daughter named Raylan. I am married. I've been with my husband for 12 years. We've been married for 2. On the side, I like to blog and write. So I do have an Instagram page, so I'll just plug that in there, called Roxy's Views. So you can always follow me, and I blog, and I like to just be inspirational and keep it positive, especially in a climate where things can be so negative.
Excellent. Thank you so much. We're so happy to have you and all of your roles in the different areas that you represent within Ontario Shores. With that, I think it's important that we touch upon the fact that the theme of this year's International Women's Day is Break the Bias. Today, we plan to discuss the impacts of the pandemic, understanding bias, and the likability-competency trade-off for women in the workplace. The global pandemic has had a significant impact on 3 groups of women: working mothers, women in more senior level positions, and women of color. First, before the pandemic, working mothers routinely worked a double shift, a full day of work followed by many hours at home. Now, many mothers have added homeschooling and other pandemic complexities to their plate. Second, the gender effect of the pandemic has seen nearly 2 million women, particularly young mothers, consider changing careers or leaving the workforce entirely. According to research, more women than men are burnt out and stressed out at work, and the pandemic has nearly doubled the gender gap in burnout. Third, women of color are increasingly subjected to racial inequalities in the workplace and discrimination. Black women, more than any other employee, feel excluded and constrained from bringing their whole selves to work, and the pandemic has only elevated that. So with that statement, I turn the table to open the conversation. When you consider the pandemic, or really any point in your career, does this statement resonate with you, and how does it apply perhaps to your life, whether it be personally, professionally? I welcome the conversation. Thank you.
So I can definitely speak about the piece that pertains to Black women, and particularly because, of course, I am a Black woman in the workplace. I mean, when I first started here, which was 15 years ago, there was quite a bit of experiences with discrimination in the workplace. Particularly, I'll give a story, if I can share a story. When I first started here at Ontario Shores, I left my position at Scarborough Hospital to come to work here to open the staffing office. Of course, this is a new staffing office. The staff have been used to doing their schedules on their own. They didn't have anyone to intervene. So here I come now telling the staff, hey, here's a new staffing office. I'm going to create your schedules. Didn't go over quite well. Rightfully so, people are angry when you try to come in and change something that they've been doing historically themselves. So I can speak to one incident that sticks out in my mind, and even now I can say in this current climate, I don't feel that discrimination like I did when I first started here. I do feel supported, but you know, there's new management, there's new colleagues here. So when I first started here, when I came in, there was a lot of hate emails going around, particularly targeted towards me. It's okay to be angry about a process. We're all angry about a process or something, but when you direct it to the person, it becomes more personal, right? Like it's like directed at you, like, and you feel a certain way. So coming into work every day, it was hard for me to come into work because I just felt like everyone was angry. And you know, being a woman of color and coming into a place that doesn't have like a massive representation of colored people in management, I felt isolated, I felt alone. I remember coming in and just going upstairs to my office, because my office was on the 3rd floor, going in, locking into my office and just doing my job and leaving. So one of the emails that were forwarded to me was a bunch of emails from staff, because they wanted to reach out to the staff and say, how can we fix it? How can we work together? So some of the emails that came forward it was directed at me. It wasn't even about the process. Like I heard that she was fired from Scarborough Hospital. I heard that she is the cousin of the director at the time, because at the time my director was an African Canadian woman. So they downplayed my qualifications and said I was her cousin, I wasn't qualified, I dropped out of school. So just blatant lies. So the management at the time, which was a different management group at the time, bright idea was for me to bring in my degree from the University of Toronto, post it in my office, so at least we can debunk that. I felt really deflated because on one, I was thinking, well, how come no one else has to do that, and why would I have to do that? If the job posting has certain qualifications in it, the staff should trust that I've met that qualifications. So, you know, asking me to bring in my degree to prove that I actually was educated and able to do the job wasn't where I wanted to go. I decided to make a stance and say I will not be doing that. I know what I applied for, you know who you hired. Let's move on to the issue and see what the staff are really upset about instead of making this about me. To this day, I don't have my degree. Maybe I'm still a little bit triggered, but I did not bring my degree into the hospital because I was just making a point. I was qualified to do that, but just that kind of experience as a Black woman, you just felt like, why do you have to prove yourself? People should just trust that, you know, I'm not the cousin of an African Canadian director. I am actually qualified to do that job. Speaking now, I appreciate where the hospital is going in terms of, facing these issues head on. Like we have a new diversity focus groups, we're putting that in our action plan. So I'm very hopeful, and I'm also glad that we have a new management group. We have a new group of staff, even new managers, where we all feel comfortable to come and speak about these issues. I think the staff have gotten to the point where they can say, hey, I'm not comfortable with this, or whether you're black or you're white, or no matter your sexual orientation. I feel like we're in a climate now at Ontario Shores where people can feel free to bring forward any issues that they're feeling. At the time, it was an issue, but I do see a change because I've been here for 15 years, so I see the change. And we can have courageous conversations. I have it with my peers all the time. I said, well, are we using biases? Are we using, are we thinking in a way that's discriminatory to the person? Let's take a step back and look at these issues. And I just feel like, yes, people will experience it. You still will experience it. But I think if we're all bold enough to talk about it and be open about it and nobody gets offended, we can fix it and move on.
Excellent. Thank you for sharing that. It's really nice to hear that over the course of 15 years, not only within this organization, but it sounds like there's been a little bit of a shift. We've made some improvements in terms of inclusion in the workplace. But I think it sounds to me like there's still some more work to do, and I'm really proud to be part of this organization who's committed to doing that. I'm not sure if Melissa or you, Jeanie, have anything to add to that.
For myself, recently added to this management group. Roxanne, I don't know you on a personal level, but recently I've been getting to know you better. And in terms of how you're perceived now in terms of leadership, I think about your story and I imagine how hard that must have been to go through. And to see where you stand right now. And I perceive you as such a strong leader. And with the pandemic and some of the staffing issues that have been happening, I see you rising up and really leading Ontario Shore staffing throughout the pandemic, and it's amazing.
She was awarded the Leader of the Year last month.
It's amazing.
So I think that speaks to how resilient you are.
Yeah, and I think just having the support of even the frontline staff. There's a shift in the frontline staff, having the support of the frontline staff and my colleagues and everybody from upper to lower management. Well, we're not lower management, but all of management. It's been great. I think that's why we're able to get to the pandemic, because the pandemic is hard for all of us, especially as women. You still have to go home and put your kids on Zoom. You still have to go home and cook. You still have to go home, and some of us are single mothers, and take care of the home and still come here and take care of, I don't want to say our staff are like our kids, but they need our attention. They need us to help them. So you're not only you're mothering at home, you're mothering at work. And sometimes you're just tired. But I think we are able to do it because I see that we're all resilient managers, we're all resilient staff, and we just come together. And I love how everyone rises up at Ontario Shores, and that is so important. And I hope we just keep that momentum so we can just continue to rise up and get through this pandemic.
Absolutely. When I think of the pandemic, of course, there are so many negative emotions that come with that. But when I think of the positive, I think of being involved in different meetings where, for example, Melissa, you shared a story of conducting a meeting and having your daughter on your lap. And I think it has really brought forward a different side of whether it be leaders or coworkers or whatever it may be. I think it really has blended. When we talk about being our true selves at work, the ability to be your true self at work is, being able to, share that little bit of your personal life within the context of your work. And I think that's something that really wasn't done before. So I do, when I reflect back over the last couple of years, I think that's definitely a way that we've started to position ourselves in a more positive way. I think this is a great segue to the theme of recognizing bias in the workplace. Most organizations strive for workplace inclusion, but research shows it is difficult to achieve. Our ability to truly be inclusive is often hindered by unconscious bias. Bias functions as an adaptive process that helps us make informed decisions based on prior knowledge, experiences, both good and bad. As a mother, I worry, and as you all shared, we're all mothers of daughters and eventually maybe granddaughters. And I think it's something, as we move forward, to consider. There is a real opportunity that our daughters, as they enter the workforce, for my daughters, I have a stepdaughter and a daughter. My daughter's 12, my stepdaughter's 15, and I imagine, within the next decade, they're going to be entering the workforce. A little later for your daughters, but I really, really challenge us as women to consider what can we do to ensure that our daughters are not facing the same challenges and bias as they enter the workplace, or really the world in the coming years. So that turns me to another question, which is, when we think of biases or bias and assumptions, I turn the tables to you and ask you, throughout the course of your career, what are some assumptions or biases that have been made about you? Melissa?
I think the way that we present ourselves at large as women or female is largely, can be largely critiqued, or there can be a lot of determinations that can be made based off of the way that we present ourselves. For example, taking upon a new leadership capacity, prior to taking on the role as clinical manager, I was functioning as the charge nurse of one of our assessment units at Ontario Shores. And the role is slightly different, despite being in a leadership capacity, transitioning to management. And in general, I would adopt a lot of what can be perceived as female characteristics in the workplace. So maybe soft-spoken, yield a lot of empathy and whatnot. And how does that translate, or how can that be viewed in terms of one's leadership capacity and skill set? Can one, or a female leader, function and function well despite holding these softer characteristics, for example? And how does one convey ourselves as effective leadership, and how do we communicate, and how are we perceived? And again, on National or International Women's Day, I think that's really relevant to speak on how we are viewed on a day-to-day basis, and how do we portray ourselves? How do we want to portray ourselves, and what kind of conversations can we have to elicit some of these positive changes for our gender? And I think they're really relevant, and I'd love to hear what you guys what kind of experiences you have as well in that regard.
Definitely, thank you. And hold your thought on that, because my next question has to do with likability in women in the workforce. But when we think of assumptions and biases, something that comes to mind is one of the conversations that we had as a group before getting together for this podcast today. We talked about we're all mothers, being pregnant in the workplace, and I had shared a story how I had taken a long time to share my second pregnancy in my workplace for fear of, perhaps not being promoted or taken seriously. And I know, Jeanie, you had some stories or a story similar to that. So I'd just like to circle back to that and have you share.
Sure, yeah. So I think one of the assumptions that always, really it's affected me in my career path is, the assumption that women in their 30s are likely to be focused on either starting or growing a family, and maybe that the commitment to the workplace and their career development might not be the focus right then. And unfortunately, I feel that this bias not only affects women who choose to have families, but also affects those women who can't have children, or those who choose not to have a family, which is too bad. This has affected me in my career path, choosing to stay with a job while I grow a family instead of starting a new career path, as well as, having that feeling of having to prove yourself while being a mother at home as well. So proving yourself in the workplace and being able to stay focused. Yeah, so it's unfortunate, as you mentioned. I feel that women they hold the sense of guilt when they're going to share these news that they are expecting another child or a child, because it's unfortunate because this is, an exciting time and you should be excited to share that information, but instead we have that sense of guilt, which isn't fair.
Which is odd. I don't know how we fix that, but I think it's something we consider. It also brings me to a point when we think about within our teams and we think about hiring. I often wonder how many times women are perhaps of that childbearing age are overlooked for positions as more senior leaders are thinking about growth within their teams and all of those pieces that fall with it. And I wonder that also is not a barrier to sharing that news, because you're right, it's incredibly good news and it's something that we should be very proud of, but we worry about that. So my next point is something that I felt really passionately about. So as I started to conduct some research, knowing that the theme of today was break the bias, I started to look at bias in the workplace, and there were so many areas. As I shared with you before we started recording, there are over 150 biases that can happen in a workplace, which is just a tremendous number, and often as women, we face a lot of those. That's just the reality of it. But one of the things that struck me the most was this study out of Harvard about the likability and competency trade-off for women in the workplace. So, for example, according to the study, men in leadership positions are often viewed as competent, self-assured, they would be viewed as successful, perceived as likable, actually, is the word that I'm trying to get back to. To put it bluntly, they probably really don't even worry about if they're liked or not. That's something that I'd say as women, traditionally, we carry with us the desire to be liked. We want to be liked by our team, by our peers, by really anybody. And I think the challenge for me is, out of this study, is that women who demonstrate these characteristics, so I'll go back, competent, self-assured, successful, are very frequently regarded as unlikable, difficult, overbearing. And I'm going to use a word that I have never in my career heard a male counterpart be described as bossy. So I'm not sure if those are any words that you guys have been described as in your career. I certainly resonate with that. And the part that is challenging for me, it's the values that and qualities that we look for in leaders don't match what society views as a likable woman. And the qualities we seek in a leader are the same ones that society associates with men. According to gender stereotypes, a likable woman should be nurturing. You touched upon this. Nurturing, helpful, supportive, pleasant. And when women break gender norms, they're often punished by society and other women. And that was something that really struck me as well, because when I think, if I had to pick one side over the other, I would use the words, which are not necessarily complimentary. I would describe myself as assertive, bossy, and truthfully, I don't know that it's always viewed as likable qualities. And I think about some of my roles, not so much professionally, because I think I've been in positions that do have a lot of females within their departments, but I find in some of my volunteer work, especially, I find, which does have predominantly males, I find that I'm almost intentionally softening my language. I'll draft an email and I'll think, what can I add to this email to be softer, nicer, to make it seem more warm and friendly? And the other thing I've caught myself doing, even since reading this study, again, in my volunteer work, when I have an issue or a thought I want to bring forward, I have positioned it to a male counterpart within my volunteer group to bring forward on my behalf, because I think it will be more likely to be accepted. And that's just something that I really struggle with. So I don't know, as we consider gender norms, knowing there's so many other biases that we could touch upon, 150, but when we consider gender norms, my question is, I don't know if any of you have experienced something similar with regard to gender norms or gender bias, or perhaps, it's a story about being called bossy or assertive in your roles. I'm not sure, but I open up the floor. I welcome some comments with regard to that.
I think it's so relevant. Again, the topic of how we're perceived and on a day-to-day basis, right? And society seemingly prescribes these gender norms upon us, and then we, in a way, we choose to adopt some of the characteristics, all of them, none of them, some of them, and how are we shaping ourselves on a day-to-day? And then as women in leadership positions, again, there's additional prescriptors that identify or speak on how are we to portray ourselves to be effective. And so acknowledging some of those biases, again, and I'm going to just simply present the soft, nurturing, caring role of the mother female, and then the dominant, strong ability to make decisions, male counterpart per se. But at Ontario Shores, a lot of our employees are female dominated as well, and I see a lot of leadership and strength in a day-to-day, and it's. I want to say the times are changing, and we see women rising up. And I challenge you all to think about how do we want to be perceived, and whether it is prescriptive with the gender norm of women or not, and then think about how can we shape those ideals on a day-to-day basis to achieve the vision that we hope for ourselves to be viewed as. And I'm not sure if any of you have any thoughts as to how you have changed your actions at work to be perceived a certain way, but I'd like to hear about that as well.
Yeah, no, I can definitely echo that. You know, my team is made up of predominantly women, which is wonderful, and it is also great to see all the strong leaders, female leaders that we have in the organization, which is wonderful. But you know, I can say that, like, coming into a new organization, into a new role, I did have that sense of feeling that I had to prove myself as a female leader. You know, I wanted the team to respect me. I wanted them to also know that I'm there for them for whatever needs, especially during this hard time throughout the pandemic. So, you know, there's definitely that conflict of, you know, feeling that feeling of wanting to support your team, but also the respect as a manager. So it's definitely a added pressure that I think female leaders feel on a day-to-day basis in the workplace.
Yeah, I think we all catch ourselves doing that, like rereading our emails or even putting a little happy face, you know, that little happy face icon in there just to soften the email. But I also think, like, having a daughter too, I try to check my own biases as well. So, like, if she's crying, I'd be like, oh, you got to be stronger than that. Stop crying. Like, you're a big girl. And then I caught myself the other day and I'm like, no, it's okay. If you want to cry, it's fine to cry. You're hurting right now. Let it out and then come and see me. But I think because we were raised, like, to be strong, take care of everyone. But in the same breath, you're raising us to be strong women. And then when we become managers, it's like, oh, you're a little bit too strong, a little too bossy. Because, you know, it's great at Ontario Shores, like you said, there's so many female leadership roles, but outside of Ontario Shores, I've seen where it's not dominated by females. And the females who are in those leadership roles have had to, like, kind of have the silent voice and be soft and whatever. But I do like that, you know, we are seeing more females in leadership roles. I also try to, like, tell my daughter, you can be anything you want. It's just not for males. If you want to do that, you can do it. So I think even starting that with our daughters and getting them into that, saying, it's fine, you can be a leader, you can be assertive, it's okay to be assertive. If a man can be assertive, I can be assertive. I mean, it's hard to break that, but I think we're getting there because we're seeing so many, like you said, women rising up all around in all kinds of positions that they never held before, right? So, which is great. Like, even having, like, looking to America, which, you know, a vice president who's a female, like, that was a very proud moment as well. So we are rising up, times are changing, but I also think we also have to be mindful of our own biases when it comes to raising our daughters as well. So definitely I caught myself and I said, no, if you're sad, it's fine. If you want to do that, it's fine. Because she even has biases and she's only 7. So she'll say, oh, this is a male job, or this is, and I'm like, nope, it's anyone's job. If you can do it, you can do it.
Absolutely.
You're seeing the different roles as well, how at work you hold the leadership role, and then you switch off at home and you have your mother role. Like there's so many different roles and expectations that we have every day to uphold. So and how do we balance that? And again, it's lovely to see supporting your daughters and supporting your team in that way. That's good.
As we talk about the shift within the workplace, and I can say I'm relatively new to Ontario Shores, one of the things that did strike me is that we do have a very diverse senior team. We have also very highly represented in the female gender. So two things that I thought were really impressive about our organization. But what struck me is we're talking about raising strong girls. And I think that's the difference. I can't say that I wasn't raised to not be strong, but I'm certainly more supportive of my daughter to be a strong female. Something I frequently find myself saying to her is like, it's really difficult to be your mother sometimes, but don't change. And I think we have a lot of pressures as mothers, especially as we're hopefully on the tail end of this pandemic, but I think we are also doing a lot of things right. So as we start to wrap up our discussion today, I do have one really important question that I'm going to have each of you answer. And I'm going to start with you again, Melissa, if that's okay. How can we best inspire women to take risks and follow their passions?
I love this question, Julie. It's inspiring, and it contains so much meaning. And I would start off by saying people every day are taking a risk. We show up every day and we're taking a risk, and we have so many different hats that we wear in general. Acknowledging the large expectations that society or that life places on us alone I find reassuring that everybody experiences a lot of different pressures on a day-to-day basis. Pandemic related, work related, family related, it all happens. With that said, I would identify that finding the reassurance and that it's common it's universal. So we're all experiencing it, and then in that sense, using your voice to speak on what's happening, and we can find comfort in normalizing the experience and then breaking some of the boundaries that have been pre-established. That would be my piece.
Excellent. I don't know how you top that.
No
Jeanie.
pressure, Jeanie.
I would definitely echo to use your voice and speak up to those matters that are important to you, so that your voice is heard. I would encourage women to take ownership of their ideas and their work, to not let pass it off to someone else. Yes. So take ownership for those ideas. And lastly, to support other women. I mean, if we want to see more women in leadership roles, they have to be bossy, they have to be decisive, assertive, strong, all those characteristics that you have shared that are represented of a strong leader, and they can't be judged especially by the other females. So I think that would be my advice.
Yeah. Excellent. Roxanne.
Like, they basically said everything, which is good. You guys made very good points, and I agree with everything. And I also think leading and showing, like role modeling, leading the way, right? So people see you doing it, women see you doing it, and they're like, I can do that too. Like, they look at Melissa, they say, Melissa has 3 young kids. She is wonderful, she's doing her master's, she's going to school, she's doing the management role, I can do that too. They see Jeanie, who's, here you're doing research, and typically when I think of research, I think of male dominant, industry, and seeing you doing that, women will say, I can do that too. They see me as a Black woman in a management role, doing leadership, I can do that too. So just us being here and sharing our story is how we break these biases. We're showing you can do it. Don't let anything be like your barrier. You can overcome that barrier and you can be great.
Absolutely. Thank you all. I can speak for all of us and say, well, as I wrap everything up, that I think it's important we do our part to create a world free of bias and stereotypes, a world where diversity is valued and celebrated. This, however, begins at home, like we talked about, spreads to our communities, schools, and workplaces. I challenge us all to question the assumptions and any biases in our daily life. We can accept that bias is unavoidable, but we can change it. Using a common language and openly discussing biases in the workplace allows us, as organizations, to address biases in the workplace and beyond. Let's target the causes of bias and mitigate their negative effect, not just today on International Women's Day, but every day. I again thank you, Melissa, Jeanie, Roxanne. I am totally inspired by your leadership roles within this organization. Ontario Shores is so lucky to have each of you, and I can't wait to see how much further you advance in your careers during your time here. Thank you so much for being with us today.
Thank you. Thank you so much.